Happy Friday, everyone. Everybody ready for the weekend? You have big plans for the weekend? So yeah, Truman big plans for the weekend are study. Yeah, unfortunately, but I'll try not to give you too much to worry about, but I can't promise that for everybody. Quick announcement before we get started. This is only relevant to the accounting students in the room, which I apologize. I don't generally isolate announcements to one group, but considering like 75% of this class is accounting students, I felt it was appropriate. You may have received a notice of this, but I just got an email. MOCPA, which is the Missouri Society of Certified Public Accountants, there actually are scholarships available, which that basically have been open for a while. $30,000 in scholarships, so 30 scholarships that are actually more than that because some of them are 500, some are 1,000. The college scholarships are $1,000 for the next year. I wanted to bring up in this year because in this room because almost everybody will be here next year. I think at least the accounting students. It's actually a pretty easy process. You just have to figure out the application. You have to get a complimentary membership application, which complimentary it means free, so that's good news. And then as far as everything else goes, you need a recommendation form. If you're worried about the recommendation form, I am happy to fill out a recommendation form for anybody who wants a scholarship. So one of those three documents is a slam dunk. You can get one for me. I think very highly of everybody in this classroom. So I think, or not just this classroom, but in this course. So I don't want to exclude anybody who's not quite here yet, or as in anybody. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Anybody in this course who would like a recommendation letter for this particular scholarship, I'm happy to provide one. So please give that some thought. And then, yeah, I don't really have any announcements other than that. Please remember that we're doing Chapter 7 next week. Chapter 7, we're going to do the lecture on Monday. We're going to do the homework on Wednesday. All right, we'll meet here on Wednesday, but we will not be doing NetSuite, which unfortunately means that we won't be doing NetSuite for the next 3 weeks. We won't be doing Excel for the next 3 weeks. So I apologize for that. You guys are going to miss out. If you want to do NetSuite and Excel in your free time, there's no judgment here. You guys can do that on your own. Anyway, let's go ahead and let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing for Excel today. In the past, what I've done for this Excel assignment is I've listed the students' names in the class and I showed some manipulation. I realized that that may not be something that people want going onto YouTube. To clarify, I actually make my videos inaccessible after about 6 months, so it wouldn't be up there permanently. But I went ahead and just did random names. So there are 31 names listed here, which represent the 31 students in this class. So you're one of those names listed up there, even though like you could actually choose which name you want. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that I used with regarding to parsing student information. So first one should be pretty straightforward. I think most people will be familiar with these first two tasks. As you probably can see, this information right now is the full student name, but it's sorted by last name. And the way that works is that actually I get a listing. I have student last name listed, then student first name, and then I have to concatenate to create the full name, which is usually what I'm most interested in. But let's say I wanted to sort this information according to first name, which I don't know why I'd want to do that. Actually, no, I know exactly why I want to do that, because for some reason, Brightspace on some of the assignment sections, they actually list information by student first name, which is really, really frustrating because you think, all right, you're accessing information by last name, but no, Brightspace listed by first name for some reason. So I like Brightspace. It's an upgrade over Blackboard, but that's one of those things that's kind of annoying. So let's say I want to actually have access to Brightspace. I want to sort this. How would I actually sort this information? Let's just go ahead and let's just do a quick sort. So we're going to go to data, going to sort. And it's going to say expand the selection because I got this column here. We don't want to do that. We're just going to leave it currently with this column. And it notices that it has headers, which is good. It defaults having headers. So this check mark box is not checked, and you probably want to make sure that it lists that because I don't want to sort. I don't want to sort student name. I just want to sort the the actual names of students. So I'm actually going to sort by that, and we're just going to go A to Z. That's all there is to it. And there we go. We have sorted by first name now. I know I've just wasted about a minute and a half of your life telling you something you probably already know how to do, but trust me, it gets more interesting from here. It gets more fascinating from here. So there's a little bit easier way if I wanted to go about this. One of the tools that I use quite frequently is called the auto filter tool, which is still in the data tab. So if you look over here, if you look at this thing, looks like a funnel. This is actually called the auto filter. It just says filter, but that's the technical name for it. If you click on it, you will notice that actually drop-down menus appear in the first row for each of the columns that have data. And this allows us to parse information, not just sorting information, but also we can sort by color, which is kind of a random thing. We can also select details if we want to have just certain pieces of information. If I don't necessarily want to select all students, I just want to select one, I can actually pull that out. The auto filter tool is very, very useful, which I'm sure you're probably already familiar with this. Again, this is one of those things that you probably learned early on. If you're not acclimated to using it, I would recommend that you get acclimated to using it, because this will be one that you will want to utilize very frequently in your Excel endeavors. All right, so now let's talk about something that you probably are somewhat familiar with, but may not use as frequently as you might think, okay? I know this is bothering me. Is anybody else seeing this? There's like no border right here. There's no border on this. I don't know why that's bugging me. It's just my OCD, but that's just kind of bothering me. So I don't know why it's there. But I'm gonna press on. I'm gonna move on, even though that's bugging me. So actually no, it's up there. It's just on my screen. It's up there on the, oh my gosh. You probably think I'm crazy, but on my screen there's no border. There's no border there. That's why I'm saying like this, he's lost it. He's lost it in old age. I swear to God, on my screen, there's no border between those two lines, okay? I swear, even though it looks like it's up there, it's not here on my screen. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. You're all nodding your heads like, nah, he's lost it. He's lost it. No, I promise I'm not losing it. All right. Anyway, so one thing that I frequently do in my classes is I will call out students at random, which I don't necessarily think it's always good to use a Socratic method, but I do think that it can be beneficial, particularly in areas where students need to get acclimated to being able to talk and be able to interact with the instructor. So for those of you who are taking auditing, who are moving and accounting the students, this will be something that I do. And you're wondering, how do I do this? How do I randomize the students? And the answer is probably predictably the RAND function. So this equals RAND, no quotes. And you'll notice that when they gives you the tip for the RAND function, it actually doesn't have any inputs. It's just a random number, okay? Now, we can manipulate that a little bit, but it's just basically open parentheses, close parentheses. I don't know why Excel does this. I think because if it's any function, it has to have an open parentheses, close parentheses for the function to be recognized, but there's no input here. It's the one of those few functions where you just have to put in the function, or you just have to put the function, and that's it. And if I enter that, you will notice it comes up with a decimal between 0 and 1. So let's just go ahead and flash fill this. And this is just a random number between 0 and 1, which it doesn't sound like it's immediately useful, but I will tell you right now, this is probably one of the functions that I most frequently use in my work. And that's not even just limited to the work that I do here at Truman State. I utilize this quite frequently when I needed to use this information back when I was working in public accounting and my PhD work. So it seems like an innocuous little function, but it does come up more than you might think. And basically what the RAND function does is just assigns a random number. Now, one of the interesting things about the RAND function is that it's adaptive. And so when you enter new information, it will update the randomization. It's not a static randomization, which can be good and bad both at the same time. So say, for example, I have this randomization and I want to keep it, but I enter new information. Like I say, okay, oops, now I just clicked on cell and it did it again. So I type in the word hello over here. You don't have to type in hello. That's not part of the task, okay? But I type in hello and you'll notice all the randomization numbers change again, which again is kind of cool and kind of interesting. I don't know why they do that, but it's beneficial in some ways and detrimental in other ways. So if I wanted to actually pull out these randomizations and keep them as they are, like I wanted to keep these randomized numbers, I could select the range. I can try to select the range and fail. Let's try that again. All right, select the range. And the easiest way I found to do this is just copy and just paste values. That way it actually puts in the actual numbers in there instead of the randomization function. Now, when I do anything else, like again, I'm gonna type in hello again, hello, and it's not gonna change. So that's kind of the shortcut around that. Now, there are multiple ways to do it. Sure, probably, but that's the easiest way I found. But going back to the randomized functions, the randomized values, where this frequently comes up is if you just need to create a randomized list. Also, you can actually have randomized number assignments. There's functions that are related to rands that we can actually list. So say, for example, I wanted to actually create a numeric value, a randomized numeric value for everybody in the class, but I wanted it to be within a certain range. Like say, for example, I wanted to have it be between 0 and 100. There's another function called rand between, which basically holds the same functions, but instead you actually specify what your range is. So I'm going to say 0 as my bottom range and 100 is the top range. And just like before, it's a randomized number, but now it's within the parameters that I've set. Again, it seems very innocuous. It seems like I can't see any possible situation I'd use it. It comes up more frequently than you might think. So it's good to actually have this information. Also, it's important to note that RAND is a mathematical operator, so it can be used in mathematical functions. Like if you wanted to multiply it by a percentage or multiply it or add a certain value, whatever it might be, you can do that. But it's important to note that anytime you use the RAND function, whatever the version might be, it will update anytime you put new information in. So you do, if you wanted to isolate information, you do have to capture it in presence. All right. Now, these functions are things that you might use. You might find them infrequently. These next functions are the areas that I think that you need to know, because these are something that even if you don't necessarily use them frequently, you should know how to utilize them. This is going to be particularly important as you start getting older. I'm assuming that many of you, some of you may already have a car, but I'm assuming many of you will buy a car by the time you graduate. Some of you at the very near future may be buying a house. By the way, don't buy a house right now. Mortgage rates are ridiculous, okay? But when they finally do drop, it may be a good idea to buy a house. Also, I do encourage for everybody in this room to start thinking about retirement now, start putting away for retirement now. Sure seems like, oh, 65, that is so far away. That's what I used to say when I was your age, and then I just turned 52 yesterday. So yeah, it's not that far away, okay? It's not that far away. So you want to actually make sure that you actually are thinking about that now. I have to think about it a lot more because I'm a lot closer to that than you all are. So these are actually going to be tools that you would want to utilize. Now, some of these you may be familiar with already. In fact, I'm sure you are, that you've talked about these back in 221, to do time value of money calculations, maybe in other classes as well. For those of you who are lucky enough to be in 303 right now, which I know there's a few people in this room who are in 303 right now, you probably have done some amortization tables. Excel is invaluable for doing functions like this, and we're going to scratch the surface. I will tell you right now, I put a lot of stock in being able to manage time value of money equations in Excel. I do think that's a skill that if you have, you will generally be better off than not having it. So I think that these are going to be very, very relevant, important tasks for you to do. So I've got some questions up here. You want to put enough money into an investment account today to have $100,000 in 10 years. By the way, this is an arbitrary number. Do not think that this is the number that you need to retire. $100,000 is not likely to lead to a good retirement unless you're in a country that the exchange rate is ridiculous. But for the most part, I think the advice was $1 million per individual in a household. That's my generation. Your guys are probably looking at, with inflation going on, $2 to $3 million, which sounds like a lot of money. But trust me when I say that if you start now, it's much easier than if you start at my age. Okay, I didn't start at my age. I'm just saying that I'm going to move on. All right. So what are we going to do? So we've actually got a function for that. So let's start out. It sounds like a present value equation because we want to know how much would you need to invest? Like, what does it need to be now to be $100,000 in the future? So let's just go ahead and use the function. So it's equals PV, open parentheses, and it actually gives you the arguments. Now, I do want to go through these because some of these arguments are a little bit less intuitive than others. The first one's really easy. It's rate. And you can type in 0.07. You can type in 7%. Either one of these are fine, because it's adaptive to both. The number of periods, we're doing this on an annual basis, so it's just going to be 10 years. For payment, you need to type in 0, because this is just a one-time investment. We're not doing an annuity yet. So we're doing a one-time investment. And then future value, it says $100,000. Technically speaking, you should be putting in cash flows that are going out as negative values and cash flows that are coming in as positive values. So technically speaking, since I'm getting $100,000 in 10 years, this should be a positive value. That being said, I like all of my results for these functions to come up as positive numbers. So whenever I have an input for any of these functions, I'm going to put in a negative number. Basically, it's telling that if I have a negative number now, I want to have a positive result be returned. Now again, oops, that's $10,000. Let's try that again. Now, again, technically speaking, this should be a positive number I'm putting in, and it should be a negative number I'm putting in and getting a positive result. So I think it works out correctly here. So no, sorry, it's the other way. I should be getting a negative result because I have to have an outflow now and a positive result. But ignoring that, I want to know what is the amount I need, and I want to return a positive value. And it's $50,834.93. All right, so pretty basic stuff. By the way, is anybody here done investing, like work with VSIP or familiar with some general investing rules? Is anybody familiar with the rule of 70? So if you take the number of years times the rate and you get a 70, that's how long it will take. That's what it will take to double. So if I'm investing 7% for 10 years, that's going to be roughly double what I need. So $50,000 now will yield $100,000 10 years from now. If I had a rate of 10%, I would only need 7 years. So whatever the factor is, you get 9%, be 8 years, 8%, 9 years, so on and so forth. Just kind of an interesting fact that you can shorthand this, which is relevant for the next one, because we're going to do a little bit of a different equation. We're going to place $60,000 in an investment account that yields 7% per year. We're going to leave it in place for 10 years. And what can we expect to have at the end of the 10-year period? Well, if we shorthand this, this is pretty easy because this is the same 70 function. So I have $60,000 now. What do I expect to have in 10 years? 120,000. Okay, so double that. Let's actually figure it out. So we're going to use the future value equation, which is almost identical to the present value equation, although we're going to be calculating from a different direction. So same input, 7%, number of periods, 10 years. No payments just yet, but now we're going to be inputting the present value. Again, I'm going to put in a negative number because I want to return a positive result. This is technically correct this time. It was technically incorrect last time. But again, I always want positive results, which is why I put in a negative number. The question always comes up, could you put the negative at the front of the equation as well? The answer is absolutely. That's fine too. Whatever your preference is, if you want to return a positive result, you always want to put a negative into the equation. So present value is 60,000. If you did it correctly, it's close to 120,000. It's $118,029. So yeah, story holds. All right, here's the problem is that you suddenly realize you don't have $60,000 just lying around. It's a problem for us all, just, not having $60,000 lying around. You're just watching Netflix one day and says, wow, I don't have a whole lot of money. Yeah, it's a problem that we can all relate to. Even me, who's been working this job for 9 years, I just don't have $60,000 lying around. It's not sitting in my wallet. That's partially just to kind of put context to it, partially so that you don't raid my house and hope that I have a whole lot of money. I don't, okay? So, yeah. They decide to make payments in the investment account of $1,000 at the end of every month. So assuming a rate of return of 7% compounded monthly, how much can you expect the investment to be worth in 10 years? So you've heard this concept before. This is called an annuity. This is just a series of periodic payments. And we can actually do this in Excel as well. So in this case, we're actually going to be calculating present value, but we're going to be doing on payments rather than you're actually calculating future value based on payments rather than what the present value is right now. So let's go ahead and do our future value equation again. Now we're going to do 7% as our rate, but note that we're making a payment every month. So we need to make this a monthly value. So it's 7% annually, which means we need to divide by 12 because we need to know what the rate is per month. Then the number of periods is 10 times the 12 months. It's 120 if you want to put in 120. It's not complicated math. I'm just doing this mathematically speaking. Now we're actually going to enter payments. This is where we actually start using payments. So we're going to put in $1,000. Our present value is 0 because we're not starting with anything. And I do want to mention this last item. This is an optional inclusion. So you will notice that there's an optional inclusion of 0 or 1, and it defaults at 0 if you don't put anything else in. So we're going to be operating from the assumption that we're doing this at the end of every month, which is called an ordinary annuity. So an ordinary annuity basically says payment occurs at the end of each period. The other option is we can put a 1 in here, and that could say that we're going to make it the period at the beginning of the month, which is called an annuity due. And we have to specify when this occurs because they're going to actually result in different values, which makes perfect sense. If I invest at the end of the month, then I'm not having any time for that interest to accrue at the end of the month. But if I invest at the beginning of the month, there's a month period where I actually have the interest accruing, which is why I get a different result depending on that. We're just going to default and keep it simple. We're just going to keep it at 0. So you can enter the 0 or not, whichever one, doesn't matter. And we get, oops, I forgot to put a negative number in. You can see my results. My bad, I'm going to put 1,000 or negative 1,000. I guess talking and didn't think. $173,084.81. So that's kind of helpful to note. It's kind of helpful to see that if you invested $1,000 every month for the next 10 years, which seems like a lot of money, but you all are going to be very successful. So in 10 years, you could have 173,000. And the good news is most of you have about 40 years to retirement. This becomes a lot larger if you have it stay in your account over a length of time. Your investments generate over a length of time. All right, now let's imagine that you have the goal of accumulating $100,000 by making payments in an investment account at the end of every month for 10 years. So assuming a rate of return of 7% compounded monthly, how much would your monthly payments need to be to reach your goal? This is a very important function, and this is one that you will want to utilize very frequently. This is not asking, what is your eventual result going to be? This is saying, how much do I need to make a monthly payment for that to achieve that goal? This might be relevant if you say, for example, I want to buy a $60,000 car. how much will my monthly payments be? Or I want to actually generate a 30-year mortgage for a $200,000 house. Actually, most of you are going to be living in a metropolitan area, so I'm going to jump that $500,000 house. If you're in Kirksville, $200,000. If you're in St. Louis, Kansas City, $500,000. Whatever it might be, you might want to know, what is that monthly payment going to be? This is the function that we're going to use to do that. So let's go ahead and put in equals EMT. Still a 7% rate, but remember we have to do that on a monthly basis. So 7% divided by 12. Number period stays at 120, which you can type in 120 or you can do 10 times 12, whichever you prefer. 120 is easy, but say, for example, you're doing a large number, like doing 30 years times 12, that's still easy. That's 360 months. I don't know why I'm making this complicated, guys. Sorry. All right. So present value is currently 0. All right. We're not putting any money in, but we do have a future value of, as we said, $100,000, which I'm going to put in negative 100,000. And it says end of every month for 10 years, which is our ordinary annuity. So we don't have to enter anything else. So if we do that, we come up with a result of $577.75. What is this saying? This is saying that if you wanted to have $100,000 in your investment account, assuming that a regular rate of interest is 7%, which interestingly, some of the CDs are actually yielding pretty close to that right now. Not quite that, it's actually closer to the 5 to 6% range. But if you wanted to achieve that $100,000 in 10 years, you would have to invest $577.75 at the end of every month to reach that goal. That's just 10 years, which is not a long period of time. Not a long period of time. Dr. Barnes, that's half my lifetime. It's not a long period of time. So yeah, that's what we're actually going for right there, and that gives us some information. So now that you've accumulated $100,000, you want to retire. Again, not enough money to retire on, but again, we're keeping this simple, as straightforward as we can. Your plan is to withdraw $10,000 for every year of the next 20 years. Assuming a rate of return of 7%, we're going to use the NPV and IRR functions to determine if your plan will work. So your goal is to actually say, okay, I've got $100,000. I believe I can live on $10,000 because I really like ramen noodles. Okay, really like ramen noodles. I see people talking there. No, that's too much, too far, Dr. Barnes. Like, no, I understand, I get that. Okay, but for the sake of the simplistic version, let's just say $10,000 will work. So will the plan work? That's where we're going to calculate an NPV. And if you remember when you did NPV back in 221 or your other classes, you had to actually list these items out and calculate individual present values for each item. Excel will do that for us, which is really nice about NPV. So let's go ahead and equals NPV. We've got to specify a rate, which is our 7%. And then it says, what are all the inputs? Which you'll notice it says you have to enter a value, value, value. The good news is we can shortcut this. We don't have to enter individual values. We can just highlight our range. So we're going to highlight C28 through C48, which is our beginning balance, and then all of our annual outflows. Now, again, these outflows assume that they're the outflows at the end of every year, which is a simplifying assumption and probably not realistic, but bear with me on this one. So we come up with a result of negative $5,551.54, which the negative is actually very relevant here. Why is it relevant? Because this is actually our NPV calculation. Remember NPV? When you see a negative number in NPV, does that mean that the plan is suitable or it's not suitable? It's not suitable. This will not work, okay? We do not have a high enough rate of return in order to get $10,000 every year for the next 20 years. It's actually something different. So what would our rate of return need to be for this plan to work? That's the second question. That's this internal rate of return, IRR, which is just the function IRR. And then all we have to do is just fill in the values, which is just what we did for NPV. Just highlight all those values right there. If we scroll up, it says IRR is 7.75%. So in the unlikely scenario that you wanted to retire with $100,000 and get $10,000 every year, you would need to find an investment that returns 7.75% on an annual basis. That's what this is telling us. So yeah, so interesting stuff. This can be adapted to a number of scenarios. I do think it's going to be very useful. Again, those amortization tables that you're learning in 303 are just kind of like, okay, I didn't see any use for this. That could actually be very beneficial to see how activity works. One piece of good news, if you really struggle with those amortization tables, they are much, much easier to do in Excel. It's like fill in one row of inputs, then flash fill everything else, and voila, amortization table for 360 months. So it becomes much easier than doing them by hand, which is one of these reasons why I like doing time value of money exercises in Excel. All right, with that, we got one more thing to do today. We've got to talk about some homework. So with respect to the homework today, some of these questions are a little bit redundant, but I do think they're valuable. Some of the questions I think are less valuable, but I still want to talk through them. So we're going to just go ahead and make sure that we're clear on what it is that we're looking at within the purchase and payments process. Again, purchasing process is what I call it. And we want to make sure that we understand what is happening here. Now, this first question, it's a pretty easy question, but I do want to make sure that we are clear on what's happening in the process. So let's just go ahead and walk through each of these steps and make sure we understand. Which of the following is not an activity in the purchasing process? Not an activity in our purchasing process. So let's just go A through the end. Do we request prices? Again, remember the purchasing process. We are the customer. We're actually talking to our supplier or our vendor. Are we going to ask them for a price? Yes, absolutely. Okay, so A is fine. Okay, so that is one of the activities. So that's not our answer. Are we going to receive items from the vendor? I certainly hope so, because that really defeats the purpose if we don't receive the items. Okay, are we going to pay for the items? If somebody says no, get out. Okay. All right. So we're going to be good, honest consumers here. We're actually going to pay for the items. We're actually going to be good customers. Are we billing customers? No, we are the customer in this situation. We will receive a bill, but that's a part of the revenue process when we sell the goods to customers. So the vernacular is really important. This is going to come up multiple times in the homework assignment, and it may come up on the exam as well. When we're talking about the purchasing process, we're assuming our interactions are with suppliers or with the vendors. When we're on the revenue process, that's when we deal with the customers. Okay, so D is not our answer, and by that logic, E cannot be the answer as well. Again, be very careful when you see all of the above, because sometimes it's the correct answer, sometimes it's not. Far less frequently going to be the answer on the exam. Question number 2. Which activity results in an increase to accounts payable? All right. This question actually repeats itself a couple of times through the homework, but I do think it's a valid question. So this is saying which activity results in an increase in accounts payable? That is the point saying, where do we recognize a liability? This question is relevant for both the revenue process and the purchasing process. Where does revenue recognition occur? Where does liability recognition occur? And they're very similar steps. You just have to flip it for the purchasing process. So what is required in the situation? Well, let's just think about a very simple scenario, okay? So we send a request for prices to our vendor. Do we have to actually recognize the liability at that point? No, we've not actually done anything. So we'd like to know how much you have to pay. It's like going to Amazon and saying, oh my gosh, those slippers that I want, they're like $20, all right? That's fine. You don't actually owe that $20. You're just inquiring. What about when you place the purchase order? When you place the purchase order, still not that point. You're actually saying, please send me the goods. Now, again, remember, it's a little bit different in our scenarios because we're talking about a traditional business to business environment. If we're talking about Amazon or we're talking about Taco Bell, then we might say when we place the purchase, we actually pay immediately. That's not the case we're dealing with here. We're talking about in a traditional business to business environment where credit is extended. Do we recognize that liability upon placing the purchase order? The answer is no. They've not fulfilled any obligations to us. What about when we receive the items? Have they fulfilled their obligation? Yes, we now have a liability to pay. All right, we have a liability to pay. When we send payment, okay, so return rejected items, that would actually affect our equation, but we're probably not going to talk too much about that. That would affect how much we owe, but it doesn't change the fact that we've already recognized the liability. And then send payment, that is when we reverse the payable. That is when we say, we owe $1,000 to this vendor. Let's send them cash. We no longer owe this payable now. Now, by the way, I just want to reiterate, there were 2 sets of journal entries. There was a set of journal entries that were relevant to the revenue process and a set of journal entries that are relevant to the purchasing process. I do think it's important to make sure you understand both. If I ask you about those on the exam, I will not include tax effects like the examples that are in the slides. But because this is an accounting class and because I expect you know journal entries by now, you do need to know what those journal entries are. And more importantly, the point that they're recognized in the process. That's really, really relevant to note. All right, moving on to question 4. Which of the following is not an example of an application control? So we had 2 types of information system controls. We have general or access controls, and we have application controls. So how do we characterize general access control? Who's responsible for general or access controls? What entity within the, what party within the entity? Employees, okay? So if we're looking for employees, we're talking about access or general controls. What entity or what party is responsible for application controls in an entity? The system. So if we're talking about something the system does, it's an application control. If we're talking about something an employee does, it's a general access control. So range checks to ensure the purchases are limited to valid amounts. What group is responsible for that? That's the system. That's a system check, okay? Employee making disbursements cannot modify purchase orders. That sounds like the employee. So that's a general access control. That's going to be our answer. But let's go through the rest. System suppliers, supplier address for payment. That's an application control. System creates audit trail for documenting changes. That's also an application control. The easiest way to think about the difference between general access controls and application controls is understanding that if we're talking about general or access controls, we're talking about what the employees can do. We're talking about application controls. We're talking about what the system can do. So that's the easiest way to think about it. It actually honestly doesn't get more complex than that. It doesn't get more difficult than that if you remember those ideas. If you're wondering, would I ask you, would I try to trick you on something? Would I give you something saying the word system and then give you something that an employee does? The answer is probably not. I'm not that devious, okay? If I'm not going to go in depth on this, I wouldn't expect you to go detail. But in the real world, you probably would want to know that as well. All right, moving on. Question number 6. Which of the following is a resource in the purchasing structure model? So basically, this is where we're getting to like UML models, okay, UML diagrams. Remember, UML diagrams, they have the resources, events, or agents. We also have conceptual structures, which kind of fall outside of that. So this is an interesting question, and I like these questions that are coming up because they ask 2 different pieces of information. First of all, they ask, what is a resource or what is a class, a particular class? Then you also have to specify that it's a class that exists within the purchasing process. So some of these may be resources, but they're not within the purchasing process. Some of these may be within the purchasing process, but they're not resources. Only one of these answers has both. Okay, only one of these answers has both. So employee labor, is that a resource? It is a resource as a part of the purchasing process. It is not, okay? So we'd say it's not part of the purchasing process, so we'll get rid of A. Receipt of goods. So first of all, is that part of the purchasing process? Absolutely, but how would we characterize this? Would we characterize this as a resource? No, what is it? It's an event. It's an event, okay? So that's how we characterize it. Paying by check, that also sure sounds like an event, okay? Which is another part of the process, okay? Inventory. Inventory sounds like a resource. Is it something that's involved in the purchasing process? It sure sounds like it. So yeah, we're going to say that inventory is involved. Now, could it be involved in other parts of the process as well? It's not mutually exclusive because we actually would distribute inventory as well in the revenue process, but it's definitely involved in purchasing. We're going to be purchasing inventory as long as we're not an exclusive service firm. We're going to assume that's the case. And then finally, a supplier. Supplier is involved in the purchasing process, but what would the class be for supplier? Resource, event, and agent. There we go. All right. Moving on, which of the following is an agent in the purchasing and payment structure model? Okay, do we have exactly the same answers that we just did before? Oh, close to it, okay? So we have paying by check, instead it says cash disbursement, which is effectively the same thing, okay? So we just defined this, we just said the agent was the supplier. That's our answer for this particular one. Which of the following is an event in the purchase and payment structure model? Okay, I think they changed them up a little bit on this. All right, so again, 2 questions. We need to identify what's the class. And we also need to identify, is it part of purchasing process, okay? So do we have cash that's involved in purchasing process? It is, but is it an agent? No, how would we characterize cash? Resource, good. Inventory, we've already defined inventory as a resource that's definitely involved in the purchasing process. That was one of our answers. An employee, okay, an employee, are the employees involved in the purchasing process? Yes, they are, okay. What are they, how do we characterize, what was a class for employee? Agent, very good, very good. Cash disbursement, is that involved in the purchasing process? Yes, we have to pay our vendors. Is that an event? It absolutely is, absolutely. So D is our answer. All right, now basically a reiteration of something we talked about before. Which of the following events would indicate the recording of a purchase in AIS? This is exactly the same as the accounts payable question that we had for number 2. We're saying, when does liability recognition occur? We've already defined this. When in the purchasing process does liability recognition occur? Receiving goods, okay, receipt of goods, okay. By the way, if I flip this and say, when does revenue recognition in the revenue process occur? How do we change that answer? We just say shipment of goods? Yes. Again, it's just a mirror of one another. It's just a mirror, okay. There are some different terms that we could actually splice. We could actually say, well, it really depends, Dr. Barnes, which again, correct answer for any question I ask is it depends. Always, it's it depends. So how old did you turn, Dr. Barnes? It depends, okay. Depends. If I'd been born a week later, I actually just turned 13, believe it or not. So yeah, because I was born a week before leap years. Fun fact, okay. Yeah, so it really depends. So but in the situation we're talking about here, we're talking about payment terms, or sorry, shipping terms. If it's FOB shipping point, then it would be recognized upon leaving the docks. If it's FOB destination, to be recognized upon the client receiving it. But I'm not going to try this. I'm not going to try to get that technical about it. It is important to note that, but I probably won't test you on that. With point of recognition, I would want you to note that for revenue, it's shipment of items. For purchasing, it's receipt of items. That's basically all that I really care about. Very important point to remember. All right, moving down, I skip a whole bunch of questions and I moved down to 26 and 27. So 26 is worded badly because it talks about a whole bunch of information before, but it's saying you're drawing an activity diagram of the process. Now, obviously, we're in this chapter 6, we're talking about the purchasing process. So if you were curious about what process that is, hopefully you knew that already. Which of the following is not true about your diagram? All right, which of the following is not true about the diagram? Well, let's just go ahead and let's walk through this, okay? Let's actually look at a diagram so we can actually use this as context. So I'm going to just go to the answers and we're going to actually say, is this true or is this not true? The issue purchase order task occurs before the received purchases task. Can we say that that's correct here? Yeah, so we have a purchase order here, we see the items, which intuitively that makes sense, but we can look at the diagram and see that that's operationalized. And we can't receive the items until we've told people what we're going to order. The purchase task can be modeled as a looping task to show multiple purchases on one purchase order. So say, for example, I say, all right, I have a lot of requests. I can actually create a looping diagram here saying, all right, I don't want to place a purchase order for just one item. I want to get all items that are necessary for our organization. They're going to be included on this single purchase order. Is that a possibility? Could we actually set that up? It'd be a more complex diagram, but certainly. Okay, so B is an answer. It's a little bit outside of the range of what we're looking at here, but it'd be very easy to modify this diagram with a looping task down here. The process starts when a customer places a sales order. Okay, so what are the entities that get involved in the purchasing process? Are they customers? We're the customer. We're actually dealing with suppliers and vendors, okay? All right. And then what starts this process? Is it a sales order? No, it's a purchase order, okay? It's a purchase order, which actually this is wrong on multiple levels. Because we were talking about the revenue process, we could say it starts with the customer, but it starts when the customer actually sends a request for information. They will then actually create a purchase order and send it to us. We, as the revenue generator, create the sales order. So this answer is wrong on multiple levels. Hopefully you picked out at least one of those. This was very apparent. This is an incorrect answer. So C is our answer. Well, let's go through the other answers. The process ends when the vendors are paid. Sure looks like it. That's what's happening over here, sending payments. And all the above is true about the diagram. Obviously, it's not because we said C is not correct. All right. Now, 27, I'm going to stay on these slides because 27 actually says, looking at a collaboration activity, BPN diagram, which is this right here. Oh, sorry, this one right here. So the supply interaction. Which of the following would not be message flows on the diagram? Well, that's easy enough to answer. Let's just look at the diagram. Now, again, if I ask you this question on the exam, I wouldn't necessarily expect you to memorize the diagram because there's a lot of easy ways to interpret this. But we can actually look, is a purchase order a message flow? Yeah, that makes sense because we'd have to send the purchase order to the supplier. Delivery of the purchase? Well, we have item delivery right here, which again makes perfect sense. They have to deliver the goods to us, okay? What about cash or check disbursement? Well, we need to pay them, so that makes perfect sense that we'd actually send that. We'd send a message saying, here's your money, okay? That makes perfect sense. Do we need to actually send any information to our supplier or vendor about our own personal inventory updates within the entity? It's not on the diagram, and it makes sense that it would not be on the diagram. This is an external party that we're communicating with. They don't care how we actually treat our inventory for our proprietary purposes. So inventory update would not be one of those message flows, and it makes sense why that would not be one of those message flows. All right, last part. So let me get back to this here. So again, hopefully you didn't get thrown here. I asked you to answer a discussion question, and then I asked you to answer a problem, which I don't know that threw some people for a loop last semester. Hopefully I didn't have any issues this time. But discussion question number 3 says, draw an activity model using BPM for the process you followed when you purchased your textbooks for the current semester. All right, so this could actually be a pretty simple diagram because it's asking about your personal experience, right? It's saying, all right, what classes do I need to purchase for? I'm going to buy the purchases, and I'm going to pay for them. That's basically all there is. Now, you could actually look at this from multiple perspectives. So how many people went over to the bookstore to buy their textbooks? So some people went over to the bookstore. How many people looked online for their textbook for a good deal? So a lot of people did that. Some people are not raising their hands. Says Dr. Barnes, I didn't buy the textbook. Yeah, it's like, yeah, I don't tell me that. I can't know that information. Okay. All right. So there's actually multiple different steps. So we could actually model this as different processes. We could say, all right, we know that there's a need. There are different options for you actually to fulfill that need. How do we characterize that in a BPM model when we actually have different opportunities or different questions we're asking? A gateway. So we can actually create a gateway to answer that question. So we can actually have a model like this. Now, again, this is not the only answer. This does not need to be how you actually characterize this, but this is just a simplified version of explaining what happened. So we determine what the required text, determine where to purchase. We can either go to the bookstore or online sources. And then once we pay for it, we actually receive the textbooks. Could you have added more activities? Yes, we could have actually included activities. We'll actually try to identify the courses themselves. We could have removed activities and simplified this. This is just a very basic diagram. I would expect this to be something that you would respond to me on the exam. In fact, if I asked this question on the exam, I would assume that it's not going to be a linear text, but or a linear process, because you would say purchasing the books, but you wouldn't specify that there was a judgment, because most people are going to say, did I purchase from the bookstore or did I purchase online? You're just going to have one routine or the other. So keep in mind, this is an optional gateway that I included on this particular one, but it's not necessary. It's not a requirement, because this is asking about your own personal experience. Hopefully, again, your own personal experience, even if you didn't purchase your textbooks, you put something up there that actually represent that. If you put in your BPN diagram, don't purchase any textbooks at all, that's technically correct, but that's just sad, okay? That's just wrong, okay? All right, last question. Moving on to the problems. So we're talking about a narrative for the tablet store, and basically I wanted to create a UML diagram. So tablet store opens sell iPads and other computing devices. It purchases tablets directly from the manufacturers. To order tablets, tablet store sends an employee submits a purchase order to the manufacturer electronically. Each purchase order can stipulate several different models of tablets from one manufacturer. Manufacturer typically delivers the tablets to the store within 2 weeks after they receive the purchase order. The tablet store pays for the shipment within 30 days after receipt. There are multiple orders to the same manufacturer. The tablet store occasionally combines payments, issuing one check for multiple receipts. All the tablet store's checks are drawn on one bank account. All right. So what is the key to creating a UML diagram? I know it's like, oh, there's so much information, Dr. Barnes, I'm overwhelmed, okay? It's not that hard. The very first thing we have to do for any UML diagram is identify our classes. What are our 3 categories of classes? Resources, events, and agents, okay? So let's do that, okay? Let's go ahead and let's start with the resources. What are the resources that we're dealing with here? Yeah, the inventory, the tablets, okay? The tablets in the inventory, okay? What else is a resource that we're going to be negotiating with? Cash. Yeah, we actually have to pay for our purchases. So 2 resources. We got part of it down. Third of the way down. Let's keep going. The events, okay? What is our primary event? What triggers this whole process? Purchasing. That's why it's called the purchasing process, okay? So we're going to actually make a purchase. And when we make a purchase, we have a subsequent process that has to occur, assuming that we're operating in a business-to-business environment where credit is extended. That's going to be not the purchase order, cash disbursement. Now, okay, I do want to talk about that. A lot of people said purchase order, and you're absolutely right, okay? That is an event that could be included. So it's optional inclusion if we want to actually say a purchase order could be an event that takes place. We're assuming that a purchase could actually be associated with purchase order, that every time a purchase takes place, there's a purchase order. If that's the case, then we don't need to model separate activities. Now, if it's possible that you could have a purchase without a purchase order, then you might want to actually separate those activities out. So I apologize. Those of you who said purchase order are absolutely right. That wasn't the one I was referring to, but you're absolutely right. All right. But the one that I was referring to is subsequently, we have to pay for the purchases. That's our cash disbursement. All right. Finally, who's involved in this? Who's involved in this? We've got 2 agents. Okay. What was our first agent? Employees. Okay. The people have to make the purchases. And who are we making the purchases from? The manufacturer or the vendor or supplier, however you want to actually characterize this. So that's all there is to it. Now, there are going to be relationships between most of these, but they're very easy to diagram out. They're fairly easy to diagram out. We just have to say, does an association exist? So let's go ahead and take a look at the diagram. So we can say the purchases is going to have a relationship to the inventory because we are purchasing inventory. Then we're actually going to make, when we talk about purchases, who makes the purchases? The tablet store employees. Who do we buy from? The manufacturers. And then whenever we make a purchase, there has to be a subsequent cash disbursement. Note, there's no relationship between purchase and cash, okay? Which is the only one that's left out because the cash disbursement is the only event that has a relationship with cash. We talk about the cash disbursement, again, relationship with the purchases. Then there's going to be a relationship with the manufacturers, and then the employees are also responsible for making those disbursements. Pretty straightforward diagram. You could add the purchase orders in here. If the purchase orders were in here, I put it up here, and I'd say purchase orders are going to be associated purchases, employees, and manufacturers. You could actually add to this model, not necessary, but that's an inclusion. As far as the multiplicities go, the multiplicities should be fairly self-evident by now, okay? Again, we're talking about relationships. Let's just look at one to make sure we understand how this relationship works. Let's look at this first relationship right here, this first association. So you'll notice over here, it says tablets inventory and purchases, and I've got a 0 to 1 right here, okay? So tablets inventory can be associated with 0 purchases. We could purchase nothing, okay? No tablets, which might be really bad for business, but it's possible. Or we can buy multiple tablets, okay? Multiple tablets. All right. So remember, when we talk about multiplicities, we start here, we go to the furthest away multiplicity, and we figure the association there. Purchases have to have at least 1 tablet. Doesn't make a sense to actually make a purchase of a tablet and then not buy something. It's like, okay, you'd like to make a purchase? How much you like? I would like 0 soft drinks. Okay, I guess that'll be $0. Yeah. I challenge you to go to Taco Bell and do that this weekend. So what can I order for you? I'd like 0 items, please. See what kind of reaction you get. I'm going to calling you to report on this. Actually, the funny part is, I think if I get extra credit, a lot of people would do it. But no, I'm not going to do that. Okay, that's more of a fun interaction. Okay, so we have to have at least 1 purchase of tablets in order for a purchase to take place. But can we purchase multiple tablets on a single purchase? Absolutely. Okay. Again, understanding the associations is not difficult. You just have to be able to characterize them. The key to the multiplicities is making sure you note when you start with 1 entity or 1 class, you move all the way over to understand the representation with the following class. That's where the confusion comes up. The multiplicities themselves are so easy. They're so easy to interpret as long as you're looking at the correct multiplicity. All right. Any questions on this? Again, this is about the level of I expect you to understand. If you came close to this on your homework, congratulations, you're really close to where you need to be for the exam. If it didn't look anything like this, then you might want to go back and make sure you approach it from the same way. Resource, event, and agent, and then model from there. All right, have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you on Monday for chapter 7.